Have you ever wondered what secrets a quiet family might hide behind closed doors? What happens when the silence is broken by a desperate act on a frozen winter night? Tonight's story begins with a rescue in the heart of the unforgiving wilderness, but it quickly uncovers a tragedy that was happening long before the snow began to fall. Prepare yourself for a journey into a family's hidden pain, where a little girl lost in the woods is only the beginning of the mystery. It's a story that will stay with you long after it's over. Jack was a man who understood silence. His cabin, nestled deep within Montana's Gallatin National Forest, was his fortress against a world he'd left behind long ago. For 8 years, his only constant companion was Buddy, a sharp-eyed border collie mix he'd found abandoned on a service road. Buddy wasn't just a pet. He was a partner, a silent keeper of Jack's solitary life. Jack had been a boy like that once, lost, alone, and hoping someone would stop for him. He had found his peace here, among the towering pines and the vast, indifferent sky. The forest didn't judge. It didn't ask questions. It simply was. And for a man carrying the weight of a fractured past, that was more than enough. The evening was settling in like a shroud, the temperature dropping with a brutal swiftness that was unique to the Montana high country. Jack had just settled into his worn armchair by the wood-burning stove, a steaming mug of black coffee in hand, when Buddy started to act strangely. The dog, usually calm after their evening walk, was pacing restlessly by the heavy oak door. He'd whine, a low, urgent sound, then nudge the door with his nose and look back at Jack, his intelligent eyes filled with an unmistakable plea. Jack tried to dismiss it, a deer, maybe a coyote sniffing around. But Buddy's agitation only grew. He began to bark short, sharp commands that echoed in the small cabin. This was different. This wasn't a casual alert. It was an alarm. Something was fundamentally wrong out there, in the suffocating darkness, and his dog was not going to let him ignore it. With a heavy sigh, Jack set his mug down. The warmth of the fire was a powerful anchor, but the bond with his dog was stronger. He pulled on his insulated boots, grabbed his heavy-duty parka from the hook by the door, and settled a wool beanie over his head. All right, I'm coming," he grumbled, his breath misting in the cabin's cool air. "You'd better not be chasing a rabbit, you old fool." As soon as he cracked the door open, a wave of Arctic air slapped him in the face, stealing his breath. Buddy shot out into the night without hesitation, a dark shape against the pristine, moonlit snow. Jack grabbed a powerful flashlight from the mantelpiece, its beam cutting a sharp, lonely cone through the absolute black. He followed his dog, the crunch of his boots on the frozen ground, the only sound besides the whispering wind in the pines. The cold was a physical presence, a predator in the woods. Buddy led him deeper into the forest, away from the faint trail that led to the service road. Jack's light danced across the trunks of ancient pines, their branches heavy with snow, creating monstrous, shifting shadows. The silence was profound, the kind that makes you aware of your own heartbeat. This was a dangerous cold, the kind that could kill a person in hours if they weren't prepared. He kept his eyes on Buddy, who was now moving with a frantic purpose, his nose to the ground. A lifetime of solitude had sharpened Jack's senses, but tonight he felt a prickle of unease he hadn't experienced in years. It was the feeling that the natural order of his world had been disturbed. Buddy wasn't just tracking an animal. This felt different. It felt human. The thought sent a chill down his spine that had nothing to do with the freezing temperature. Suddenly, Buddy stopped. He stood over a small, dark shape huddled at the base of a massive Engelmann spruce. The dog didn't bark, but instead nudged the shape gently, then looked back at Jack with a soft whine. Jack's heart hammered against his ribs as he hurried forward, his flashlight beam trembling. The light fell upon the figure and the air froze in his lungs. It was a child, a little girl, no older than 3 or 4, curled into a tight ball. She was wearing a bright pink snowsuit and a ridiculous little hat with a giant pom-pom, a splash of vibrant, innocent colour against the bleak, monochrome wilderness. She looked like a discarded doll, utterly out of place in this harsh, unforgiving environment. Her eyes were open but vacant, staring into nothingness. She wasn't crying, she wasn't even shivering anymore, a terrifying sign that her small body was losing its fight against the cold. There was no time for questions. Instinct took over. Jack ripped off his own parka, the sudden shock of the cold a jolt to his system. He wrapped the small, still form in its warm, down-filled layers, his rough hands trying to be as gentle as possible. He scooped her into his arms. She weighed almost nothing. "It's okay, little one. It's okay. I've got you," he murmured, his voice hoarse. He began rubbing her cheeks, which were pale and waxy, with the telltale white patches of frostbite just beginning to form. He had to get her to warmth. Now! He turned and plunged back through the deep snow towards the distant, welcoming glow of his cabin. Buddy trotted faithfully beside him, his mission complete. As Jack hurried, the girl in his arms didn't make a sound, her silence more frightening than any scream could ever be. Back inside the cabin, the sudden blast of warmth was a relief. Jack laid the girl gently on the sheepskin rug in front of the stove, carefully unwrapping her from his parka. Her skin was icy to the touch. He worked quickly, removing her damp hat and snow boots. He checked for other signs of injury but found none. She was just cold and terrifyingly still. Her eyes, a startlingly clear blue, followed his movements but seemed disconnected, as if she were watching a film of her own life. He had expected fear, tears, a desperate cry for her parents, but there was nothing, just this profound, unnerving emptiness. He knew little about children, but he knew this wasn't right. A child lost in the woods should be hysterical. This little girl was like a ghost. He heated some milk on the stove, adding a spoonful of honey, and knelt beside her. "Here, try to drink some of this. It'll warm you up," he said softly, holding the mug to her lips. To his surprise, she drank, swallowing the warm liquid greedily, her small hands remaining limp in her lap. As the warmth began to seep into her, a faint flush of pink returned to her cheeks, making her look less like a porcelain doll and more like a living child. She was beautiful, with wisps of blonde hair and a perfect little button nose, but the vacancy in her eyes remained. "What's your name, sweetheart?" he asked gently. "Can you tell me how you got out here?" He was met with the same profound silence. She just stared past him, as if he wasn't even there. As the little girl slowly warmed up, a deep exhaustion seemed to settle over her. Her eyelids began to droop. Jack carefully lifted her and carried her to his own bed, the only real bed in the cabin. He tucked a thick wool blanket around her, and she was asleep almost instantly, her breathing soft and even. He stood over her for a long moment, a storm of questions raging in his mind. Who was she? Where were her parents? An accident? A car run off the road? Or something worse? The thought was a dark cloud he didn't want to explore. He walked over to the wall-mounted phone, a relic that was his only connection to the outside world, and picked up the receiver. Dead. The storm from a few days ago must have finally taken down the line. There was no cell service this deep in the mountains. He was completely cut off. He and the silent little girl were alone. Jack knew he couldn't risk travelling the treacherous back roads in the dark, not with the child. He would have to wait for morning. He pulled 2 armchairs together, creating a makeshift bed for himself near the stove, with Buddy curled up on the floor nearby. Sleep, however, refused to come. Every creak of the old cabin, every gust of wind against the windows, made him jump. He watched the small, sleeping form in his bed, a fragile bit of humanity that had washed up on the shore of his solitude. He thought of his own childhood, of the nights he'd felt lost and abandoned even when he was under his own roof. This child was lost in a different way, not just in the woods, but somewhere deep inside herself. He felt a fierce, unexpected wave of protectiveness. Whatever had happened, he wouldn't let anything else hurt her. He would wait for the dawn, and then he would find answers. The first grey light of dawn was just beginning to filter through the windows when a sound shattered the morning's peace, a frantic, desperate pounding on his front door. It wasn't a polite knock. It was the sound of someone at the end of their rope. The force of it vibrated through the cabin floor. Buddy shot to his feet, a low growl rumbling in his chest. The little girl on the bed stirred, sitting up and rubbing her eyes. but her expression remained just as placid and detached as it had been the night before. The noise didn't seem to frighten or even surprise her. Jack got up, his body stiff from the awkward night. He knew with a certainty that settled like a stone in his gut that this was about her. He moved to the door, his heart thudding a heavy, cautious rhythm. This was it. The story was about to arrive. He unlatched the heavy bolt and pulled the door open. On his doorstep stood a man and a teenage girl, both looking like they had been dragged through hell. The man was tall, with the same clear blue eyes as the little girl, his face a haggard mask of sleeplessness and terror. The teenager beside him was pale and trembling, her dark eyes wide and haunted, ringed with shadows. She looked like she was carrying the weight of the entire world on her slender shoulders. "We're looking for a child," the man blurted out, his voice cracking with desperation. "Our daughter. She's lost. Please, have you seen anything? Anything at all?" Jack didn't have to answer. The man's gaze flickered past him into the warm light of the cabin and fell upon the small figure sitting up in the bed. "Lily!" The name was a strangled cry, a mixture of pure, unadulterated relief and disbelief. The man, who Jack would soon learn was named Mark, rushed past him and fell to his knees beside the bed. He gathered the little girl, Lily, into his arms, burying his face in her hair and rocking her back and forth, his body shaking with sobs. He showered her face with kisses, checking her hands, her feet, murmuring her name over and over again. "Oh, Lily, you're okay, you're safe." Through it all, Lily remained passive, allowing the embrace but not returning it, her gaze still fixed on some distant point. The teenage girl, Chloe, followed her father into the room more slowly. As her eyes met Jack's, he saw a complex storm of emotions. Overwhelming relief, yes, but also a profound, soul-deep guilt that seemed to crush her. Tears streamed silently down her cheeks, but they didn't look like tears of joy. They looked like tears of confession. Mark fumbled for his phone, his hands still shaking. "Jess? We found her. She's okay. I'm not kidding. She's safe," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Yeah, call the sheriff. Tell them to call off the search. No, she seems fine. We're at a ranger's cabin. I'll explain everything later. We're coming home." He hung up and finally turned his full attention to Jack, his eyes shining with gratitude. "Thank you. I don't know how. I don't know what we can ever do to repay you. You saved her life." Jack just nodded toward Buddy, who was now sitting calmly by the hearth. "Don't thank me. Thank him. He's the one who found your treasure." He looked from the relieved father to the silent, tormented teenager. How did she end up in the middle of the woods on a night like this? The question hung in the air, heavy and sharp. Mark's face hardened as his gaze shifted to Chloe. He looked at his older daughter, not with concern, but with a flash of cold, undiluted fury that made Jack flinch. It was a look Jack knew all too well. He had seen it in his own father's eyes a lifetime ago. Chloe visibly shrank under her father's glare, wrapping her arms around herself as if to hold her splintering pieces together. It's a long story," Mark said, his voice tight. But Jack wasn't looking at him anymore. He was looking at the girl. "You look like you've walked through a nightmare," Jack said to her, his voice low and gentle, cutting through the tension. It was the first time anyone had spoken directly to her with kindness. Her composure finally shattered. A choked sob escaped her lips. "It's my fault," she whispered, the words barely audible. "I did it. I took her there." The confession spilled out of her, a torrent of pain and shame. She told them about the night before, starting with something as trivial as a torn jacket, a new jacket, a rare gift in a house where all resources, financial and emotional, were directed toward her younger sister. Her stepmother, Jessica, had been furious. "She screamed at me," Chloe said, her voice trembling as she relived it. "She said I was ungrateful, a burden. She said I didn't care that all their money went to Lily's treatments. She hit me." She didn't look at her father as she said this, but Jack saw him wince, a flicker of guilt crossing his face, before being replaced by weary resignation. It was clear this was not the first time. Chloe's words painted a bleak picture of a home filled with resentment and anger, with her at its centre. Chloe described the feeling of being a ghost in her own home, of walking through rooms when no one truly saw her. Her father, once her hero, was now a stranger, consumed by the overwhelming needs of his sick daughter and the constant demands of his wife. "I just wanted him to see me," she whispered, tears now flowing freely. "I just wanted things to go back to how they were before." She spoke of a time before Lily was born, a time when she and her dad would go on hikes, when he would read to her at night, when she was the centre of his world, a time when she felt loved. The memory was so vivid and the loss so painful that it had become an unbearable ache in her chest. She wasn't just a troubled teen, she was a grieving child, mourning a life and a father she had lost. And so, in a moment of childish desperation, she had formed a plan. A terrible, simple plan. If Lily was the problem, then Lily had to disappear. Not to be hurt, her child's mind reasoned, but just to be gone. So she had waited until her parents were distracted, then slipped out into the frigid night. She found Lily on her small slide in the backyard, going up and down with the same methodical emptiness she always did. She took her sister's hand, and Lily, as always, went with her without protest. She led her away from the house, away from the yard, and into the dark, silent woods. "I just left her there," Chloe choked out, the horror of her own actions finally crashing down on her. I thought if she was gone, Dad would be my dad again. I was so stupid." Mark finally broke his silence, stepping forward as if to shield himself from the raw pain of his daughter's confession. "It's not that simple," he said, his voice pleading, as if he were trying to convince himself as much as Jack. "You don't understand the pressure. Lily's condition. It's a rare genetic disorder. It affects her brain. The treatments, the specialists, they cost a fortune. I have to work 2 jobs just to keep us afloat. There's no time, there's no energy for anything else." He ran a hand through his hair, his exhaustion palpable. "Jessica is... she's at her breaking point, we both are. We're just trying to survive." He was trying to provide context, to explain the suffocating circumstances that had led to this moment. But his words sounded hollow, like excuses for a much deeper failure. Jack held up a hand, stopping him. He looked from the desperate father to the broken daughter, then to the little girl on the bed, who remained oblivious to the storm raging around her. "The why is more than just stress and money, Mark," he said, his voice quiet but firm. He turned his gaze fully on the other man. "Let me ask you something. Did you ever have a new person come into your house when you were a kid? A step-parent?" Mark looked confused by the question, but Jack continued, his eyes boring into him. "Because I did. And a home can become a very cold place when you're the one who doesn't belong." He wasn't just a ranger anymore. He was a man holding up a mirror to another man's soul, and he wouldn't let him look away. Jack's voice took on a distant quality as he dredged up memories he kept locked away. "My stepmother," he began, "she adored my little sister, dressed her up like a doll, called her Angel. But me, she looked at me like I was a piece of furniture she couldn't wait to throw out. I was the leftover part from my father's first life, a constant reminder of what he'd lost. And the worst part wasn't her anger. It was my father's silence." Jack's eyes never left Mark's face. He wanted the man to feel the weight of every word, to recognise the pattern, the echo of a story repeating itself through generations. He just stood by and watched. He let her chip away at me piece by piece, because it was easier than standing up for me. It was easier to focus on the new, perfect family. He described a specific memory, the details still sharp as broken glass after all these years. He'd been blamed for breaking a tool his sister had actually dropped. His stepmother had raged, and his father had been there, watching from the doorway. "He knew I didn't do it," Jack said, his voice barely a whisper. I could see it in his eyes. But he did nothing. He just turned and walked away. A father's indifference. It burns colder than any winter night, Mark. It leaves a scar that never fades. It makes a child feel worthless, invisible. He saw a flicker of recognition in Mark's eyes, the dawning horror of a man seeing his own reflection in a story of someone else's pain. Chloe was his son, and he was his father. The cycle was unbroken. Jack leaned forward, his voice low and intense. Kids do desperate things when they feel invisible. They scream for attention in the only ways they know how. Some run away from home. Some get into trouble at school, trying to make a big enough noise so someone will finally look at them. He paused, letting the weight of his next words sink in. And some try to remove the one thing they think is blocking the sun. The silence in the cabin was absolute, broken only by the crackle of the fire and Chloe's ragged breathing. Jack had laid the family's entire tragic dynamic bare, not with accusations, but with the shared pain of his own experience. He had given Mark the missing piece of the puzzle, the truth he had refused to see. The dam inside Mark finally broke. The anger, the excuses, the weary justifications, it all washed away, leaving only a raw and profound sorrow. The look of fury he'd given Chloe was gone, replaced by an expression of utter devastation, as the full weight of his failure as a father crashed down upon him. He wasn't just tired or stressed. He had been absent. He had stood by while his daughter felt abandoned and unloved in her own home. He had let it happen. He slowly turned toward Chloe, his movements heavy with regret. She looked up at him, her eyes full of fear, expecting more anger, more blame, but instead she saw a brokenness that mirrored her own. For the first time in years, he truly saw her. He saw her pain. Mark closed the distance between them and wrapped his arms around his daughter, pulling her into a fierce protective embrace. He held her tight, as if he could physically piece her back together. "I'm sorry," he sobbed into her hair, the words torn from the deepest part of his soul. "Oh, Chloe, I am so sorry. I'm sorry." Chloe collapsed against him, her own body racked with a fresh wave of sobs. But these were different. They were tears of release, of a dam breaking within her as well. For a moment, they were just a father and daughter, clinging to each other in the wreckage, finally acknowledging the wound that had festered between them for so long. Little Lily watched them from the bed, her blue eyes as empty and placid as a winter sky, a silent testament to the long and difficult road that still lay ahead for this shattered family. Jack watched them, feeling like an intruder on a sacred, painful moment. He understood that this embrace was not a solution, but a beginning. The damage ran deep, and the path to healing would be long and fraught with difficulty. Jessica was still at home, a major part of the broken equation, and Lily, the innocent catalyst for so much pain, still needed a level of care that would continue to strain them all. But for the first time, there was a glimmer of hope. The truth was out, spoken aloud in the quiet warmth of his cabin. The invisibility that had nearly destroyed Chloe had been vanquished, at least for this moment. Mark had finally been forced to see the other child he had been neglecting, the one whose wounds were on the inside. As the family prepared to leave, a local sheriff's deputy arrived, his truck crunching through the snow. The official report would be simple. A child wandered off and was found safe. The deeper, messier truth would remain within the four walls of Jack's cabin. Before they left, Mark gripped Jack's hand, his eyes filled with a gratitude that went far beyond the rescue of his younger daughter. "You didn't just save Lily," he said, his voice thick. You saved us." Jack simply nodded, understanding in the immensity of what had transpired. He then knelt down in front of Chloe. "This forest is always here," he said softly. "If you ever feel lost again, you come find me. But you talk to your dad first. You hear me?" Chloe nodded, a watery, fragile smile touching her lips for the first time. Jack stood on his porch and watched the sheriff's truck disappear down the snow-covered track, its red taillights blinking in the grey morning light, until they were swallowed by the trees. The silence of the forest rushed back in to fill the void, but it felt different now. Less peaceful, more thoughtful. He had intervened, broken his long-held code of solitude, and in doing so he had possibly altered the course of a family's life. He thought about Mr. Evans, the teacher who had seen him when he was an invisible, angry boy, the man who had shown him that a different path was possible. Perhaps, in a small way, he had just done the same for Chloe. He looked down at Buddy, who nudged his hand with a wet nose. "Come on, old friend," Jack said, turning back toward the warmth of his cabin. "Let's get some more coffee on." Later that day, Jack sat by the fire, the cabin once again, his quiet sanctuary. But the events of the last 12 hours had left an indelible mark. The ghost of a family's pain lingered in the air. He thought about Chloe, a girl pushed to the edge by a loneliness he knew all too well. He thought about Mark, a good man broken by grief and responsibility, who had almost lost everything because he couldn't see past his own pain. And he thought of Lily, the silent, beautiful child at the centre of it all, a symbol of both immense love and unbearable burden. It was a stark reminder that the most dangerous wilderness is often not the one with trees and snow, but the one that exists inside a family's heart, the one that grows in the silence between people who are supposed to love each other. He knew he would probably see them again. Their small town wasn't that far away, and a story like this would travel. He hoped that the raw, painful honesty that had been born in his cabin would survive the journey home. He hoped Mark would find the strength to not just apologize, but to change, to become the father both his daughters desperately needed him to be. It would be a fight every single day, a fight against old habits, against resentment, against the crushing weight of their circumstances. But Jack had seen something in Mark's eyes as he held Chloe, a flicker of the fierce love that had been buried for too long. And sometimes, a single flicker is all you need to find your way out of the darkness. In the end, this was never just a story about a girl lost in the woods. It was about a family that had lost its way. The dramatic embrace in that small cabin was the climax of years of unspoken pain, a turning point that could lead to healing or further heartbreak. The consequences of that night will ripple through their lives forever. They have a chance now to rebuild what was broken, to learn to see each other again. Jack, the solitary ranger, became the unlikely catalyst for their salvation, proving that sometimes the person who can help us the most is a stranger who sees our pain with fresh eyes. This story is a powerful reminder that the quietest people often carry the heaviest burdens, and that everyone, especially a child, deserves to be seen. Thank you for joining me on this emotional journey. If this story touched you, please give it a like, subscribe for more content, and share it with someone who might need to hear it. And I'll leave you with this question. Have you ever felt invisible in your own life? Let us know your story in the comments below. We're all in this together.